In the year 1972, the world's attention turned not to a battlefield or a political summit, but to a small stage in Reykjavik, Iceland. There, two men sat silently across from each other, with nothing but a chessboard between them. One was Boris Spassky, the Soviet world champion, refined, disciplined, the pride of a superpower. The other was Bobby Fischer, the volatile American genius, erratic, unorthodox, and on a personal crusade. Their match was more than a game. It was a proxy war at the height of the Cold War, and it changed the world. But this was not the first time chess had done so. Centuries earlier, in 1575, another match in Madrid marked the beginning of international chess competition. The Spanish king, Philip II, watched as two Italian masters, Giovanni Leonardo and Paolo Boy, took on Spain's finest. It wasn't just about strategy. It was about prestige, politics, and the assertion of intellectual dominance during the Renaissance, a time when power was increasingly tied to reason and thought. The match was widely reported, inspiring courts across Europe to adopt chess as a symbol of refined intellect. From that moment, chess was no longer just a pastime, it was a political instrument. Fast forward to the 19th century. In 1851, the London Chess Tournament became the first international chess competition of the modern era. One match in particular would become legend: Adolf Anderssen versus Lionel Kieseritzky. Known today as the immortal game, it wasn't played for a crown or a flag, but its brilliance captured something deeper, a glimpse into the creative potential of the human mind. Anderssen sacrificed both rooks and his queen, yet delivered a flawless checkmate. The world saw that chess could be art. The immortal game was reprinted in newspapers, studied in salons, and elevated the status of chess from science to culture. Then came the early 20th century, an age of revolutions, empires, and ideological wars. In 1927, the match between Alexander Alekhine and José Raúl Capablanca wasn't merely a personal rivalry. Alekhine, representing France, challenged Capablanca, the reigning champion from Cuba. At stake was not just the title, but the legacy of classical positional play versus aggressive tactical innovation. Alekhine's victory symbolized a shift from the clean, logical strategies of the past to a more chaotic, dynamic future. It mirrored a world no longer guided by certainty, but torn between traditions and upheaval. Chess continued to mirror the global order through the mid-20th century. The rise of the Soviet chess school in the 1940s wasn't coincidental, it was deliberate. The USSR viewed chess as a tool of ideological supremacy. Soviet champions like Mikhail Botvinnik weren't just athletes, they were state instruments. Trained, funded, and ideologically prepared, their victories were meant to prove the intellectual superiority of communism. Every international tournament was a Cold War in miniature, and the West noticed. Which brings us back to 1972. Bobby Fischer, a lone American, arrived in Reykjavik not just to win a title, but to dismantle a system. The match between Fischer and Spassky was broadcast across the globe. Millions watched every move. Fischer's erratic behaviour, his refusal to play unless certain conditions were met, nearly collapsed the match before it began. But then he played, and when he did, it was revolutionary. He broke opening theory, introduced psychological warfare, and proved that an individual could triumph over an entire system. When Fischer won, it wasn't just a victory for America. It was a philosophical statement. Genius could defy order, and the individual could overcome the collective. But the story doesn't end there. Chess would soon enter the digital age, and with it came a new kind of conflict. Not between nations, but between man and machine. And the next game that changed the world wouldn't be played between two humans at all. It was 1996 when a new kind of challenger stepped into the global spotlight. Not a grandmaster, not a prodigy, but a machine. IBM's Deep Blue, a supercomputer programmed to play chess at a level never before seen in artificial intelligence, faced off against Garry Kasparov, the reigning world champion and one of the greatest minds the game had ever known. This wasn't just man versus machine. It was intuition versus calculation, humanity versus its own creation. And once again, chess became the stage for a turning point in history. Kasparov won that first match, but barely. Deep Blue had taken a game off the world champion, and the world watched in awe. The following year, in a rematch that would become legend, Deep Blue returned, faster, smarter, more powerful. And in 1997, the machine won. It was the first time a reigning world champion had been defeated by a computer in a match under standard tournament conditions. To many, it marked the beginning of a new era, not just in chess, but in how we understand intelligence itself. This moment resonated far beyond the chessboard. The media framed it as a philosophical crisis. If machines could beat the best human minds at the most intellectual game ever created, what did that say about us? Could intuition, creativity, and insight truly be replaced by raw processing power? Kasparov himself later said that losing to Deep Blue felt like losing to a calculator with arms. But the symbolic blow was undeniable. The world had crossed a threshold, and chess had been the proving ground. But the machine wasn't done. In the decades that followed, chess engines like Stockfish and later AlphaZero didn't just play like humans, they transcended human understanding. AlphaZero in particular was different. Unlike traditional engines that relied on brute force evaluation of millions of positions, AlphaZero taught itself to play chess from scratch, using reinforcement learning. Within just a few hours of self-play, it was defeating the most powerful engines in existence, using strategies no one had seen before, sacrifices that seemed irrational, long-term plans that defied conventional wisdom, and positional concepts that made even grandmasters question the foundations of the game. Once again, the game had changed. Chess players began using engines not just to analyze games, but to learn new concepts. The very nature of chess knowledge evolved. What had once taken decades to master could now be simulated and optimized in hours. Human preparation became inseparable from machine guidance. The modern grandmaster was no longer a lone warrior with notebooks and intuition, but a hybrid thinker, guided by the cold logic of algorithms. But the influence of chess extended beyond the professional realm. With the rise of online platforms like chess.com and Lichess, and the viral explosion of streaming, chess entered a new golden age, this time not in smoky cafes or tournament halls, but on screens and smartphones around the world. And once again, a game would change the world. In 2020, the Netflix series The Queen's Gambit sparked an unprecedented global interest in chess. Inspired by the fictional rise of Beth Harmon, millions of people, many of them women and young girls, flocked to the game for the first time. Chess sets sold out worldwide. App downloads soared. Online tournaments saw record-breaking participation. It was more than a pop culture moment. It was a renaissance. But it was also a reflection of something deeper. A search for meaning, logic, and beauty in a world increasingly dominated by chaos and noise. Chess, with its rules and structure, offered a kind of psychological refuge. And once again, the game had shaped the cultural landscape, not through war or politics, but through narrative and emotion. Even beyond the screen, chess has found new relevance in education and neuroscience. Studies have shown that playing chess enhances cognitive functions, improves memory, and develops critical thinking skills. In countries like Armenia and India, chess is now part of the school curriculum. Governments have begun to recognize what kings and emperors once knew, that teaching people to think like chess players can shape generations. In prisons, chess has become a tool for rehabilitation. In slums, it's used to teach logic and discipline to children with no access to formal education. And in therapy, chess is increasingly used as a metaphorical model, one that mirrors real-life decision-making, consequences, and strategic thinking. Chess is no longer just a game. It is a universal language, a cognitive instrument, a cultural force. And yet, amid all this transformation, one thing has remained constant: the power of a single game to capture the imagination of millions. One such game took place in 2010. It wasn't a world championship. It wasn't even a tournament final. It was a match between two relatively unknown players, David Howell and Gawain Jones. The game was extraordinary, not for its fame, but for its beauty. Howell sacrificed a queen for a series of minor pieces, creating a cascade of tactical brilliance that stunned commentators and fans alike. The game went viral, shared not through newspapers but through YouTube and Reddit. And that's when a new realization dawned: the democratization of chess beauty. No longer was the game owned by federations, politicians, or grandmasters. It was owned by everyone. A 14-year-old kid from Indonesia could play a masterpiece online and have it seen by millions. A retired engineer in Brazil could stream bullet games to thousands of fans. The chessboard, once a symbol of hierarchy and elitism, had become a stage for global creativity. And yet we are only scratching the surface. What other games have changed the world? What future moments will redefine the game again? From ancient Persia to TikTok, from Soviet propaganda to AI experimentation, chess has always been more than just black and white squares. It has been a mirror of human thought, ambition, fear, and imagination. And the next world-changing game may already be in play. Long before computers, before streaming, and even before the codification of chess rules, the game was already shaping societies and civilizations. Its origins trace back to 6th century India, where a game called Chaturanga emerged, not just a pastime, but a simulation of war itself. Each piece represented a unit of the Indian army: elephants, cavalry, chariots, and foot soldiers. This early form of chess wasn't played for entertainment alone. It was a tool for teaching military strategy, a reflection of hierarchical order, and a metaphor for life and death. As the game travelled westward through Persia and the Islamic world, it evolved. In Persia, it became shatranj, and with it came the idea that a game could model fate and wisdom. It's no coincidence that ancient texts often compared rulers to chess players, masters of foresight and calculation. In Islamic culture, chess was both revered and controversial. While some scholars praised its intellectual merit, others questioned its alignment with spiritual values. Yet it persisted, crossing borders, languages, and religions. By the time chess reached Europe around the 9th century, it began to absorb the cultural DNA of the continent. In medieval Europe, the game mirrored the rigid structure of feudal society. Kings, queens, bishops, knights, rooks as castles, and pawns as peasants. But something strange happened during the 15th century. One single rule changed the nature of the game forever, and in a way, reflected the seismic shift in society. That rule was the empowerment of the queen. Originally, the queen in earlier versions of chess was a weak piece, moving only one square diagonally. But in late medieval Europe, she was suddenly granted her modern power, able to move any number of squares in any direction. This wasn't just a rule change, it was symbolic. It coincided with the rise of powerful female rulers in Europe, figures like Isabella of Castile and Elizabeth I. The Queen's transformation on the chessboard paralleled her emergence in the world. And this reshaped chess itself, faster, deadlier, more dynamic. The modern game was born. It's no wonder that chess has always drawn the attention of the powerful. Napoleon Bonaparte was an avid chess player. He saw the board not just as entertainment, but as a training ground for strategic domination. During his exile on St. Helena, he reportedly played obsessively, using chess to relive campaigns, anticipate betrayal, and simulate future glory. But even Napoleon's use of chess pales in comparison to the way it was later weaponized in the 20th century. Not by a general, but by a state. In Stalin's Soviet Union, chess was transformed into a national project. It wasn't enough to be good at the game. Soviet players were expected to become instruments of ideology. Children were recruited early, trained systematically, and subjected to psychological and tactical rigor. The chessboard became a metaphor for Soviet planning, control, and order. Players like Botvinnik, Tal, and later Karpov and Kasparov weren't just champions, they were national heroes, expected to dominate the Western world on intellectual terms. The Cold War wasn't just nuclear standoffs and spycraft, it was also the battle for the chess crown. The 1984 World Chess Championship between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov wasn't just a contest of skill, it was a psychological and political war of attrition. Lasting 5 months and 48 games, the match was eventually called off by Soviet officials, not because a winner had emerged, but because the tension had become unbearable. The official explanation was health concerns. But many believed the cancellation was politically motivated. Kasparov was seen as too independent, too unpredictable, a risk to Soviet control. In a game where every move was calculated, this was perhaps the most political move of all. Years later, Kasparov would defect from the system, challenging both the chess establishment and the political order of Russia itself. He founded new chess organizations, campaigned against corruption, and even entered the political arena. His journey from Soviet hero to dissident encapsulates the power chess has always had, not just to reflect the world, but to reshape it. But not all world-changing games happened under floodlights and press coverage. In 1960, a quiet match was played between a relatively unknown player named Bobby Fischer and a young Soviet master, Tigran Petrosian. Fischer lost. But the game exposed something far more important, that even the greatest talents could be stifled by political pressure and psychological warfare. Fischer would later claim that the Soviet system had conspired to draw games to maintain control over the championship cycle. Whether true or not, the seed of rebellion had been planted. Fischer's eventual rise wasn't just a personal victory, it was a rupture. His approach to the game was obsessive, hyperlogical, and utterly unique. He studied openings like a scientist, memorized hundreds of variations, and played with a precision that bordered on machine-like. Yet he was also deeply human, flawed, emotional, paranoid. His matches, especially against Soviet players, weren't just games. They were Shakespearean dramas. One of his most famous games, against Donald Byrne in 1956, later dubbed the Game of the Century, was played when Fischer was just 13 years old. In it, he sacrificed his queen in the middle game to orchestrate a devastating counterattack, culminating in a forced mate that stunned the chess world. The brilliance of the game wasn't just in the tactics, but in the vision, the ability to see far beyond the horizon, to embrace temporary loss in pursuit of ultimate victory. It became a metaphor for Fischer's entire career, and in many ways for the game itself. Every great chess game that changes the world does so not just because of what happens on the board, but because of what it represents. The human mind in its most distilled form, navigating complexity, confronting fear, embracing creativity, and defying limits. And now in the 21st century, a new frontier emerges. With neural networks, brain-computer interfaces, and quantum computing on the rise, the next revolutionary chess match might not involve just a human or a machine, but something in between. The boundaries between thought and action, between intuition and code, are beginning to blur. What happens when a human player can visualize 10 moves ahead through direct brain stimulation? What if two minds are linked, competing on a level no single brain could reach alone? Will we still call it chess? Or will it become something else entirely? One thing is certain. As long as humanity continues to think, to dream, to strategize, and to struggle, there will always be a game of chess that changes everything. Not every world-changing chess game is about power, technology, or even brilliance. Some are about timing, about being in the right place, at the right moment, with a story so compelling that it pierces through the noise of history. And sometimes that story is tragic. In 2000, the chess world was stunned when Grandmaster Vladimir Kramnik defeated Garry Kasparov, ending one of the longest and most dominant reigns in chess history. The match wasn't just symbolic, it marked the end of an era. Kasparov had become more than a champion. He was an icon, an unstoppable force. Kramnik, calm and methodical, played with a style that was quiet but unbreakable. He used the Berlin defense, a once obscure opening that became, after that match, one of the most feared weapons in elite chess. Overnight, opening theory changed. Coaches rewrote repertoires. A single match had realigned the global meta of chess strategy. And just like that, Kasparov walked away from professional play. But endings are also beginnings. Just a few years later, a teenager from Norway entered the spotlight. Magnus Carlsen didn't look like a traditional grandmaster. He smiled easily, wore hoodies to tournaments, and carried himself more like a surfer than a scholar. But behind that casual exterior was something terrifying, a mind with both the memory of a machine and the intuition of an artist. Carlsen rose quickly through the ranks, defeating seasoned veterans with a style that seemed effortless. He wasn't known for wild tactics or brilliant sacrifices. Instead, he crushed opponents with relentless pressure, squeezing wins from equal positions, turning nothing into something. He changed how people thought about chess, not as a battle of deep preparation, but as a psychological marathon. With him came a new generation of players who no longer feared tradition. They embraced chaos, creativity, and resilience. By 2013, Carlsen had claimed the World Championship title, and he would go on to dominate the chess world for over a decade. He didn't just win tournaments, he won everything. Classical, rapid blitz. His rating crossed boundaries previously thought unreachable, and his influence was felt far beyond the chessboard. Carlsen became a brand, a model, a YouTube sensation. He made chess cool. His games were streamed live to millions. Commentators broke down his thought process in real time. Fans cheered in chat rooms like they would in football stadiums. And for the first time, chess had a global superstar who bridged both the elite and the casual worlds. But even Carlsen's dominance wasn't immune to disruption. In 2022, a scandal erupted that shook the foundations of modern chess. During the Sinquefield Cup, Carlsen lost a rare classical game to a young American grandmaster named Hans Niemann. The loss itself was surprising, but what followed was explosive. Carlsen withdrew from the tournament without explanation, posted a cryptic tweet referencing cheating, and refused to play Niemann again. The chess world imploded. Accusations flew. Statements were issued. Investigations launched. What made this moment so significant wasn't just the scandal itself, it was how it played out. Online, instantly, publicly. Tens of millions followed every update. Suddenly, chess wasn't just a game of strategy, it was global drama. Legal threats, social media storms, data analysis, trust in the game itself was questioned. Could engines be used in real time? Were tournaments secure? What did fairness mean in the digital age? And just like that, chess entered its next phase, the post-truth era. The tools that had elevated the game, engines, streaming, mass accessibility, were now being used to tear it apart. Paranoia grew. Suspicion spread. The very technologies that had democratized chess were threatening its integrity. But history shows us, every crisis in chess eventually becomes evolution. After the cheating scandal, federations began implementing stricter anti-cheating protocols. Detection software was refined. Camera systems became more advanced. Psychological profiling entered the conversation. A new ecosystem began to form. one that treated the game with the same seriousness as high-stakes sports. And in that environment, new champions began to rise. Players like Alireza Firouzja, a prodigy from Iran who now plays under the French flag, brought an electric style to the board, dynamic, fearless and emotionally charged. Young players like Pragnanandar from India and Nodirbek Abdusattorov from Uzbekistan were winning against top-tier veterans before they were even old enough to vote. The next generation wasn't just strong. They were fast, creative, and fully adapted to the digital ecosystem of modern chess. And behind them was a community that had never been larger or more engaged. Content creators like Gotham Chess, Hikaru Nakamura, and Agad Mehta began shaping the narrative of the game. Their YouTube videos, Twitch streams, and commentary drew millions of viewers. Chess was no longer confined to elite circles. It had become mass entertainment, accessible, funny, relatable. For the first time in history, people were becoming grandmasters in front of a live audience. Fans followed their journeys, celebrated their victories, and mourned their losses. The emotional stakes were real. The board was just a part of the experience. And yet, despite all the spectacle, the drama, and the technology, the core remained the same. 64 squares, 2 armies, 1 goal. It's this timeless simplicity that gives chess its strange power. Every generation finds something new in it. In war, it becomes a metaphor. In politics, a weapon. In science, a model. In art, a canvas. In life, a teacher. And it keeps evolving. Today, experiments are underway to create 3-dimensional chess variants, time-looping chess puzzles, even cooperative forms of the game. Neural interface prototypes allow players to make moves with thoughts alone. Chess is being played in space, coded into DNA and woven into virtual worlds. But no matter how strange it gets, its greatest moments are still the ones that touch something human. A comeback under pressure, a sacrifice that defies logic, a draw fought with honor, a quiet move that speaks louder than words. There will always be games that shift the course of chess, and by extension, games that reflect the shifting course of the world. Because chess has never been just a game. It's been a mirror of intelligence, of conflict, of beauty, and of the eternal human desire to understand, to predict, to outwit, to master, and perhaps most of all to imagine what comes next.